Warm greetings, everyone. My name is Dorothy Guerrero, and welcome to Global Justice Now's interview series, Southern Perspective on the Coronavirus Pandemic. In this collection of interviews, we normally focus on news and analysis from leaders and representatives of social movements and progressive groups from Southern countries, so we could share with you how they are collectively addressing the pandemic, and also the initiatives that are forming in their countries and regions in terms of shaping the demands to governments or the alternatives they want to see for the future. In this interview, however, I will focus on Russia. It is not a southern country. It is still a major political and economic global power. It is also one of the top countries with COVID-19 infection rates and death toll, with a big number of which among health workers. Russia, like many other countries, eases the lockdown recently, despite the fact that the virus is still spreading and far from over. In fact, Russia has canceled its high-profile Asia-focused economic forum in the Far East. I will talk to Ilya Budraitskis, a political analyst, researcher, and sociologist working with Moscow School for Social and Economic Sciences. Hello, Ilya, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine, thanks.
Yeah, thank you for this interview. And as you can imagine, not too many people outside Russia knows what is happening. Partly maybe because we don't get much news apart from we only get the idea that it is one of the top countries that are affected by the pandemic. So, can you tell us what is happening in Russia with the continuing spread of COVID-19, please?
So, as you know, probably Russia still occupies the third place in the global coronavirus map. So every day we have several thousands new cases of infection. But however, the lockdown is officially nearly over, and the reason for it, I think it's pure political. So it has nothing with the real situation with the pandemic, which is still continuing.
And do you think that there is accurate information, and are there ways that the public and media to scrutinize what the government is reporting?
There were a lot of doubts internationally and in Russia and Russian civic society about the correct character of the information provided by the government. And in fact, I think that the numbers that we have for now, the numbers of the cases of the infection, and especially the number of deaths, could be minimized by the government. The reason for it that they want to escape for the quarantine, for the lockdown as soon as possible, and also they want to provide some positive news, positive result for the people in Russia about the victory over the coronavirus. So even for now, we have the official announcement that we got a victory over the corona virus, and the reason for it, as I said, is mostly the political reason, but also, of course, economic and social reason, because they don't want to pay the people, to support the people in the situation of the growing unemployment and the economic crisis provided by the pandemic.
Ilya, can you tell us, have there been changes in the last decade, for example, about the health system in Russia? I think for many of us outside Russia, we would be very interested to know or how you will describe the health system in Russia. Is it still public? Is it getting privatized? And how efficient it is?
So we still have a public healthcare system, but it changed a lot during last 2 decades because it survived through so-called optimization. So it's kind of neoliberal transformation of the healthcare system, which mean that many hospitals which were recognized as ineffective were closed during last decade. That's why we lost many beds, hospital beds, places in the hospitals, which of course provide a very negative effect in the time of the pandemic.
Yeah, how is COVID-19 affecting the question of governance and power in the country? I have read that there will be a plebiscite in the near future, next week, in fact, on July 1. And part of that plebiscite is for people to respond for a change in the constitution. And that will, of course, change the government, the term of government, for example. Can you tell us more about it?
Yeah, so in fact, the political elite in Russia found itself in a very tricky situation because just before the pandemic in January, they propose these amendments to the constitution that will give the opportunity for Vladimir Putin to stay for the presidency for the next 2 terms. But then the pandemic happened, and they had to postpone this plebiscite and the improvement of these amendments because of the pandemic. But during the pandemic, the level of popularity of the government, the personal popularity of Vladimir Putin, fall down. So for now, you can imagine that Vladimir Putin level of popularity is the lowest during the last 20 years of his rule. That's why they need to organize this plebiscite as soon as possible. That's why, in fact, they stopped the lockdown and propose this plebiscite to happen on the 1st of July. So the procedure of this plebiscite will be totally illegal, let's say. So there is no opportunity for independent observers to control the process of the plebiscite. There are many different opportunities for the manipulations from the top on its results. And in fact, this plebiscite will happen in the situation of the very low trust to the government, to the state, from the people in Russia.
There must be some way of a poll or generate a way to generate opinions from the majority or the general population. Do people think that in the midst of this pandemic, these plebiscites should continue? Is it the priority, or because it's changing the term as well of the lockdown, that the lockdown is easing to allow this plebiscite to happen, if I'm not mistaken. So does it mean that the plebiscite also shows what the government wanted to show, that the problem is getting, we're getting over the problem, so therefore we could now have the plebiscite? But what do people think about it?
So it's interesting then that in Russia, according to opinion polls, there are many people who believe that the lockdown should be continued, but there are also many people who believe that it should be stopped, mostly for the social and economic reason. And that is very related to the policy that government provided during the pandemic. Because unlike many other countries, Russian government didn't provide any financial aid to the people who lost the salaries during the pandemic. And that's why, of course, many people really were very dissatisfied with the situation of the lockdown, and they welcomed the decision to stop it. However, uh, from the different parts of the Russian society, from those who believe that the lockdown is necessary, for those who believe that it should be stopped, the trust to the government is very low in general.
Is there a way of formation or initiatives from non-state actors or non-government organizations, campaigners? Is there an initiative to gather various organizations together so that one, there is a collective analysis of what's really happening, and or a collective shaping of demands, what people wanted to tell the government and ask from the government, and three, a way of collective imagining or forming what society, what Russian society do people wanted to see after the pandemic?
Right. Of course, there are a lot of different oppositional groups in Russia. There were a lot of debates around this plebiscite. What should be the best strategy for it? What could be the alternative for the continuation of this regime? And I will say that the most needed value, the most needed, um, let's say, common demand for the people of Russia for now is a social justice. Because the situation of the pandemic really, let's say, open up the extreme inequality and extreme lack of the responsibility from the elite in the Russian society. So the main feeling that you have for now in Russia is a social anger. So I will say that most people in the country not so much concerned with the democratic rights, but mostly concerned with the social inequality.
Mhm. In terms of this idea that the pandemic is a social justice issue, it is actually shared by all countries, you know, all regions, and that the pandemic is a global pandemic, and therefore the way to address it should also be global or international. What do you think? What are your thoughts about international solidarity or internationalist approach to it, or internationalism? Can you share us your view about that?
Yeah, I think that paradoxically, despite the closing borders and despite the lockdown in the countries, we found out during the pandemic that the situation in different countries there have many in common, and that is the rupture in between the elites and the people, the hopeless situation for the poor people, which are the, let's say, the majority in Russia, for example, and the lack of the real support from the state and from the society in general for the people who have no property, who have no any defense, who have a low social status, and so on. So in this sense, For example, the protests in United States were very much debated in Russia, and there were a lot of attempts to compare the situations, despite of the very big difference, historical, social differences, and so on between our countries, because in some way we share the same problems.
Mhm. So Ilya Butrynskis, thank you very much for this time and for this interview. And we hope to hear more from you. Maybe I will come back after the plebiscite and then ask you more questions about that. So meanwhile, take care and thank you.
Thank you.